Becky here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Well, I'm here today to talk about dehydrating herbs. I do one of these videos every year and it's for 2023. So the time I'm shooting this is actually early April, but you'll be seeing it later in May. And so I'll be having a lot more herbs to dehydrate by then than what I'm showing you today. But I wanted to get this video out as soon as I possibly could, since I'm so far ahead on my videos, just to give you some tips on dehydrating herbs specifically. And I also have a video I did last year where I talked about general dehydrating, where I talked about other types of foods and the times and temperatures you're going to use for that. But herbs are going to be more unique than dehydrating your heavier vegetables, fruits, and for sure meats, eggs, and more. Because most of your herbs that you're going to be collecting, such as the camellia flowers that I have here, the feverfew, the stinging nettle, and I didn't pick any dandelion flowers today because it's too cloudy, so none are opened up. Because if you're using an electric dehydrator, you're going to need a lower temperature so you do not damage these more delicate things. Fruits, vegetables, and meats can handle higher temperatures. And even then, I adjust my temperatures according to what it is. But I almost never go over 115 degrees no matter what it is. And I talk about that more in that video where it's more general that I'll be putting in the description box down below. So today I'm actually going to be going ahead and using my Kasori. And what you see here is the stainless steel rack that comes with this Kasori. And whenever I'm dehydrating anything that's smaller, or well, it doesn't matter what it is, anything that could possibly fall through those holes, because here's the one thing about the Kasori is the holes are much bigger. I never use plastic trays. I always use, in this case, cloth, because that's going to keep all the tiny bits from falling through. And it also does actually help speed up the dehydrating, and using a natural fabric like cotton is important because you need it to be breathable. You can use the silicone, but I only use those for more liquid type items, anything that could drip or run through, such as dehydrating eggs or blended tomatoes, which I then turn into tomato flakes. When I'm dehydrating meats, or a turkey or chicken bone broth, that's what I use the silicone sheets for. And I'll link to one of those videos down below. I'll link to the one on dehydrating eggs, because that's my favorite way to preserve eggs for long term now. So anyway, to the cloth, I just sprinkle my herbs over there. Now what I have found in our area is that though a lot of people, if you live in a drier climate that's not humid, you can hang a lot of your herbs to dry. Some people put them in paper bags and then hang the paper bags up, or set them in a place where they can get plenty of airflow. The paper bags do allow airflow, but also protect the herbs from light and collecting dust, unlike when you hang your herbs up. So hanging herbs is a tried and true way, but it's only going to work well in places that don't have high humidity like we do. And here's something I have found is that even though right now is the time I'm shooting this video, we actually still have fires going in the wood stove. And I did try dehydrating some camellia flowers on the wood stove dehydrating rack next to the wood stove. Don't want to do that on top of the wood stove. It would get too hot and damage the herbs. But funny thing is dehydrating next to the wood stove, they take way too long to dry and never fully quite get dry. And I think it's because, and when I think about this, I found this before, is that when I try to, it's the same, even next to the wood stove, something about herbs just wants to keep reabsorbing the moisture from the air. Now I can dry other things like citrus peels, meat, cheese, and more, and even yogurt next to my wood stove, no problem. But the herbs are always an issue. It can take days and they still never fully dry. So in this case, I am using an electric dehydrator, and I'm using my Kasori. Now the thing about a cabinet style dehydrator such as the Excalibur, the Kasori like I have, or the Cabela's, or whatever other type you have, is those kind, because your heat and air source are coming from the back and blowing across whatever you're dehydrating, pretty much everything should dehydrate equally all at the same time. So whatever you're putting in that type of dehydrator, you want it to be something where the temperature is good for all of the above. Not something where you're dehydrating a meat and a more delicate herb at the same time. That's not going to be appropriate. But if you're using a stackable dehydrator such as the Nesco, which I also have and I also like, typically I use that more through the spring and summer. You can stack your items in such a way where your more delicate items are on the bottom. So if I'm using my Nesco, I would be putting these or golden oregano or something, the most delicate things on the very bottom. And then the heavier things, the things that need more heat or can handle more heat, at the very top. So I could actually dehydrate meat and a more delicate herb at the same time, and they'll dry equally. The things on the bottom aren't getting as hot because they're not as close to the heat. But since I'm using my Kasori, I'm only going to be dehydrating herbs in that today. So I'm just going to do a couple of trays to get, for example. So here are the camellia flowers. One of the other things I'm going to be drying today is stinging nettle. And yes, I'm handling, in fact, I went out and gathered this with my bare hands. They're still kind of stinging a little bit. But I'm so used to handling this with my bare hands now that it really doesn't bother me. In fact, I kind of like it sometimes. It's kind of crazy, as long as they don't hold too tightly. But also to know if you're harvesting stinging nettle, if you can do your best to kind of touch it from the top of the leaf rather than the bottom, you're going to be less likely to sting yourself, because the needles are on the back side of the leaves and then usually along the stems, but not so badly on the stems as they are at the back of the leaf. So when I'm dehydrating nettle, by the way, because they cluster together like this, I cut the stems off. You can dehydrate these on the tray along with them, or you can use these right away in tea or to make a broth if you're making a vegetable broth. And so that's what I'm going to do with those. I'm actually going to throw them into a pot of tea today because I like making nettle tea. So I'm just going to do a few of these to show you how I do this. And whoop, there's one of my green onions. I just got some green onions starting to grow. I'm cutting them so that I can spread them out better, and they'll dry better if they're more spread out. Now, one thing about herbs is that a lot of times, depending on how they lay on the trays, you can, like if you're using a stackable dehydrator like the Nesco, you can usually pile them a little bit higher than you can in the cabinet, at least in the Kasori, and it's not such an issue. As long as there's a lot of airflow in between, they usually still dry pretty good. I have to really check the nettle leaves. I did rinse them off, but because right now because they're in an area where the chickens always have access to, they tend to kick up a lot of dirt onto them. So I do have to rinse these off. And that's another question I get frequently is, do you wash your herbs? No, I don't wash them. However, if I am harvesting them, just like with the nettle, because of where the chickens are always kicking dirt up on them, I do try to rinse them well to get any dirt or whatever else they're flinging off of there. And by the way, you can actually eat a raw stinging nettle if you're careful. If you, like I say, if you grab it from the top side and then you roll it up, you can roll that up in such a way and then just chomp it down and eat it without stinging the inside of your mouth. But if you're new to nettle, the thing is when it's cooked or dehydrated, it's not going to sting you. Well, you'll find after it's dehydrated, if you're doing this to crush your herbs like I like to do, you'll feel the pokies in there, because the needles are still there, but the venom inside the leaf itself has all been neutralized because of the dehydrating or even the cooking process. I do add nettle to a lot of things, in stir fries and more, usually mixing it in with other vegetables as a side dish, or dried. I add it to just about anything, be it soups, casseroles, and more, usually mixed in with other herbs such as dandelion leaves, strawberry leaves, grape leaves, you name it. Anything that is green out there that is edible, I'll dehydrate it up and put it all in one blend together. But the ones I find most important to me are the dandelion leaves and the nettle, because of their properties, and especially the nettle being very good for thyroid health. So there's a tray of nettle. And then this other herb I have here is Feverfew, and it is very bitter. I don't use this as a vegetable. Feverfew is something that I use for alleviating pain and inflammation. And so it is one of the main herbs that goes in my pain extract. And I'm going to go ahead and separate this out. And if, by the way, once these are all dry, if your stems aren't dry, you can either compost them or put them back on the dehydrator after you get all the dried items off there and just run them again with something else. So anyway, the Feverfew is one of the main herbs, along with catmint, echinacea, and valerian leaf when I make my pain extract. So I do have a video recipe on that, and I think I did type up a written recipe to go with it. But I'll link down below in the description box. I'll give you the link to the video recipe, and if I did write it out, you'll find the link to that, to the written form, in that description box. And so anyway, Feverfew is very, very bitter, and it even has kind of this strong, almost bitter smell to it. But I've come to really appreciate it. In fact, when I first tasted Feverfew raw, the leaf is the part, you can eat the flowers too, but the leaf is the main part you use. It was so bitter and horrible, I said, I'm never going to do this again. But after a while, you get accustomed to it. And now when the Feverfew is coming in fresh, I don't use my extract. I go out and nibble on fresh valerian leaves, catmint leaves, and Feverfew leaves. A lot of times I'll get all three and just chomp them down if I need something to help with pain and inflammation. And also the other thing about Feverfew is because it is a bitter, very, very good for your digestion. This is why one of the reasons why in the Bible, like for the Passover, even though the bitter herbs were to also represent something spiritually, they're all also very good for digestion. So eating bitter herbs with your meals can really improve the digestion of that meal. And it might not be pleasant, but it will also be helpful. And it can also actually help cleanse the palate to make things taste better as well. So let's talk about temperatures and time. So when it comes to herbs, the 95 degrees, I never go this low, but it can be a safe one. I always go higher because of our high humidity. It does take longer for things to dry. So if I set my herbs as low as 95 degrees, it could take days for it to dry. So typically 110 is where I aim for. I almost never go above 110 degrees. You can go lower if you feel more comfortable with that. And then, like I said, if you're using a stackable, then just put your more delicate things farther away from the heat. Now, some people have a stackable dehydrator that have the heat source from the bottom. Then you would just reverse that and put your delicate things at the top and your heavier things at the bottom. If you have a cabinet style, anyone who has a cabinet style should have at least an adjustable temperature so that you can set it at its lowest. And it's all going to depend on your area, what temperature and time is going to work best for you. So my Kasori is always automatically set at either 110 or 115, depending on the things I'm dehydrating at that time. And it's also automatically set at 18 hours, though in the case of herbs, they may only need 10 hours or 12 hours. It's really going to depend on the herbs, how thick you have them on the trays. And again, humidity does play a big part. One thing I do like about the cabinet style over my Nesco is that if I forget about my herbs and it shuts off and I go in and check them, a lot of times they're still very dry, even if they've sat for several hours. Where that doesn't happen with my Nesco because of our humidity. If the thing is done drying and I forget about them, I usually have to dry them again because now they've absorbed all the humidity from the air. And so I don't have to completely start over, but I do have to run it for a couple more hours again to get them fully dried. So always be paying attention to your humidity level, and you'll know by your climate if you've got a lot of humidity or not. One thing about dehydrating anything, if you live in a dry climate, you've got it the easiest over the rest of us. So you can do things without using any kind of electric dehydrator at all. You can just put them in some kind of hanging thing, set them outside, let the wind and heat just dry them out, and no concern about the humidity in the air preventing them from drying. And by the way, I did do a video a couple years ago on various ways to dehydrate. So if you can't afford to buy an electric dehydrator, there's a lot of different ways you can make your own. And so I gave a lot of ideas in that video. And then another one I did more recently than that was a comparison of I think 4 different dehydrators. 2 that I have, 2 that I don't have, but I did do some reading up on, and also listening and paying attention to comments people made about things like the Excalibur and the Cabela's. And again, doing some research in that so I could make some proper comparisons. So I did that video. If you haven't bought one yet, a dehydrator, you might want to go watch that video and then just kind of get an idea what you think is going to suit your needs best. And then also don't forget to watch out for them at garage sales, anything secondhand. I I have purchased at least 2 dehydrators secondhand, one for $3, one for $5, and they were like brand new when I got them. And I'm so glad that I did, because I had a couple of my other older ones where the motor just stopped working. So it was nice having those backups, because I like having in midsummer, I can have as many as 3 dehydrators running at one time. So anyway, I'll link to both those videos down below so you can learn more. So I can tell you a time, but if I tell you 12 to 18 hours, but you live in a dry climate and you're running an electric dehydrator, yours could be done in as little as 8 to 10 hours. So it's always best when you're starting to dehydrate anything for the first time, check it every couple of hours. And then once you'll start getting familiar with the amount of time needed. Now, it's very unlikely, especially with lower heats, that your items are going to burn. So when you're talking about temperatures of 95 to 110 degrees, it's very unlikely that your herbs will burn. But if they're very delicate and then you leave them on there for too long, they can get overdone, and you could possibly destroy the benefits of those particular herbs. Oh, and then one more thing, I forgot to say this earlier. So when it comes to harvesting your herbs to dehydrate, you want to, when you're talking about leaves, like the Feverfew. So my Feverfew's got a ways to go before it is flowering. So now is the time to start harvesting the leaves. Right away you want to get the leaves. If that's the part of the plant, get them as soon as they start filling in. So valerian is going to be the next one I do, because I got a lot of valerian leaves coming in. But at the time I'm shooting this video, they're still only this big. I do like to wait until they're more like that big before I gather them and dehydrate them. But you want to do that before the plant starts getting flowers. Here's the reason why when it comes to that, is that when you harvest them before the flowers come on, you're going to get the most benefits, the most nutrients out of the leaves at that time. If you wait until after the plant has flowered, not only do the leaves get tough, they're just not going to be as high in nutrients, because then most of the energy at that point is going to go into making the flowers or the fruit if your plant gets fruit. So if you're harvesting things like strawberry leaves, blackberry leaves, raspberry leaves, you need to do that before they start to flower. Now, if you're talking about dandelion, is one of the rare ones where the flowers are actually ready to harvest before the leaves. So it's because the leaves are still really young and just tiny, and they're still growing when the plants start to flower. So I get the flowers right away. So very first thing off the dandelion, I harvest for dehydrating. I do still pick some of the young dandelion leaves and eat them right away, because I love eating them fresh. But then once the flowers start to slow down, that's when a lot more energy goes into creating the leaves, and you get tons of leaves, and some of my leaves can get this big and that wide, as you can see in this picture right here. And usually that's when I harvest leaves for dehydrating. I throw in salads and more. So dandelions are kind of the exception, and I'm sure there's others that are part of that exception. But as far as harvesting flowers like the camellia or anything else, as soon as they bloom. As soon as they bloom, harvest them. Don't let them sit on there for days. As soon as it blooms, or even when it's just partially open, like this one's mostly open, that's good too. But you don't want to wait too long, because then, especially if it's a flower that doesn't last very long, the sooner you pick it, the better. And dandelion's one of those, because it only lasts for a couple days and then it's done. So I usually, the first day it blooms is when I try to get out there and pick that dandelion. But in the early spring, you want to definitely leave some of those dandelions for the bees, because it's the first flower of the season they get. One exception to this, as far as flowers that I know of, is lavender. You can actually, in fact, it's actually better, at least what I've heard, to actually pick the lavender before each individual flower fully opens up. You're actually going to get more benefit out of it that way, which that surprised me. But by the way, lavender leaves, you can pick and use those too. They're a great herb. They're healthy. You can make a wonderful tea out of them. I use lavender leaves too, but the same thing applies as with most others. You want to gather those leaves before the plant starts making flowers, because the other thing too about the leaves, if you notice, is once the plant starts to flower, the leaves no longer get real big and lush. Any new leaves they get always stay on the smaller side and more sparse. So another good reason to start picking the leaves before it flowers. So I hope I covered everything I meant to cover, but if you have any questions, please put them in comments down below, and if I have a video where I already cover it, I'll link it to that, or I'll just try to answer your question directly if I see it. Sometimes your comments still get missed, and I might see them months down the road and think, where did that come from? I should have already seen that. But anyway, I do my best to try to get in there and answer it. And if you don't hear anything back, just email me, raincountryhomestead@gmail.com. That's one way you can be certain that you will get a hold of me. So anyway, and any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, tips, or what are your favorite herbs to dehydrate, please put those in comments down below so people can learn from you as well. And thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.